The psychology of predators. Predators don't look like monsters. They rarely raise their voices. They rarely force anything. They don't need to, because true psychological predators use something far more dangerous than violence. They use trust. They walk among us, colleagues, friends, neighbors. They blend in. They study the rules of empathy, not to feel, but to mimic. A predator doesn't seek power in general. They seek power over you, and to gain that, they first have to learn you, your insecurities, your patterns, your needs. They listen, not to care, but to calculate. They remember what you share. They note how you speak. They track what wounds you try to hide. And when they act kind, it's not kindness, it's preparation. Predators build trust quickly. They make you feel safe, special, seen. They rush connection, because the faster you bond, the less likely you are to notice the trap. They often wear the mask of protection. They offer advice. They give gifts. They step in when others don't, not out of generosity, but strategy. So, when they start to cross lines, you hesitate to speak. You don't want to question someone who's been so good to you. And that's how they trap you, with debt, with obligation, with silence disguised as gratitude. Psychological predators don't strike without calculation. They pick victims carefully, not based on weakness, but based on access, isolation, empathy, unmet needs. They target people who forgive easily, who explain things away, who carry guilt for things that aren't their fault, not because they deserve pain, but because they've been trained to tolerate it. Once the bond is formed, the manipulation begins, but slowly, so slowly that you don't recognize the shift. They test your boundaries. They apologize after crossing them. They learn what they can get away with. Then they push further and further. A predator's goal is not just control, it's dependency. They want to be your only source of validation, the only one who truly understands you. So they begin to separate you from others. Quietly, they criticize your friends, make subtle remarks about your family, question the intentions of those around you, until the world feels less safe, except when you're with them. This isolation is not physical, it's emotional. They don't lock the door. They just convince you that there's nowhere else to go. And once they have you alone, truly alone, they begin to shape your reality, gaslighting, withholding affection, rewarding obedience, punishing independence. It's not always visible, it's not always loud, but it's always calculated. They make you feel confused about what happened, then blame you for reacting, then comfort you when you cry. It's a triangle: abuse, blame, affection, repeated until you forget which part is real. Predators don't just break people, they rebuild them into versions they can control. You laugh less, you speak softer, you hesitate more, not because you're weak, but because you've been conditioned to associate expression with consequence. And all the while, they appear normal, kind, charming, maybe even respected, because predators thrive in darkness. And the easiest way to stay hidden is to appear safe, Some predators use religion, some use status, some use love. But the pattern is always the same. They elevate themselves to a place of authority over your reality. And when you try to leave, they shift. They cry. They beg. They guilt you, not because they've changed, but because they're losing control. A predator doesn't miss you. They miss what they could take from you: your attention, your fear, your loyalty. But freedom isn't about escaping them. It's about seeing them, seeing the patterns, the manipulation, the scripts they use again and again, not just on you, but on everyone. You didn't fail to notice. You were taught to look the other way, taught that kindness means giving second chances, taught that love means sacrifice, taught that discomfort is your burden to carry. But none of that is true. You don't owe your silence. You don't owe your trust. You don't owe another conversation. You owe yourself safety, clarity, freedom. The most powerful thing you can do isn't fight them. It's stop playing the game. Because once you see the pattern, you can never unsee it. And once you stop dancing, the mask slips. They'll look confused, hurt, maybe even angry. But that's not your concern, because predators can only control what stays silent, and silence ends when truth begins. Narcissism. At first, they shine. They walk into a room and everything bends toward them. Their confidence feels electric. Their stories are captivating. They make you feel seen in a way no one else ever has. But narcissism isn't about confidence. It's about control. And what feels like light often casts the darkest shadows. Narcissists don't love people. They love attention. They don't connect. They perform. Their interest in you is conditional, based on how well you reflect their ideal image back to them. In the beginning, you feel chosen, special. They compliment you, admire you, and even idolize you. This is called love bombing, a flood of attention, affection, and promises. It feels like destiny, but it's actually design. They're building a bond fast, too fast, not because they feel deeply, but because they need to secure you before you see the truth. That truth comes later, after you're attached, after you start believing in the version of them they created. Then it shifts. Suddenly, you're no longer enough. You say the wrong thing. You ask for too much. You stop feeding their ego. The same traits they praised are now flaws. You were passionate. Now you're too intense. You were independent. Now you're selfish. The pedestal disappears, and so does the warmth. This phase is called devaluation. It's when the narcissist begins to criticize you, blame you, and withdraw emotionally, but just enough to make you chase. You wonder what changed. You try harder. You think if you love them more, they'll go back to how they were. But that version wasn't real. It was a mask, and it slipped the moment you stopped being useful to their self-image. A narcissist doesn't want love. They want supply, validation, admiration, obedience, anything that confirms their superiority. And when you stop supplying it, they punish you. Sometimes it's through silent treatment. Sometimes it's rage. Sometimes it's cheating. They'll do whatever it takes to reassert power over you. to remind you that they decide your worth. And when you pull away, they pull you back. They say just enough to keep you close. They apologize, but don't change. They make promises they don't intend to keep. It's not reconciliation, it's manipulation. Narcissists are masterful at weaponizing empathy. They learn your triggers, they mimic your values. They use your compassion as leverage. They frame themselves as the victim, even when they caused the harm. They say things like, "You're too sensitive. Why are you making this about you? No one else ever had a problem with me." Slowly, you start to internalize their version of reality. You begin to see yourself through their eyes, flawed, needy, difficult. But you weren't these things before them. Narcissists rarely take responsibility. Apologies, if given, are empty. Mistakes are always someone else's fault. And when confronted, they deflect, deny, or attack. If you cry, they roll their eyes. If you withdraw, they accuse you of abandonment. If you express your pain, they call it drama. Every emotion you show becomes ammunition against you. Eventually, you start to self-censor. You stop sharing your needs. You tiptoe through conversations. You smile when you're hurting, not because you're weak, but because you've been taught that honesty leads to punishment. This is the narcissistic cycle. Idealize, devalue, discard, then repeat. After they discard you, they may return, not because they miss you, but because they miss control, because they want to see if you still bleed when they touch the wound. This return is called hoovering. Like a vacuum, they try to suck you back in. They say they've changed. They miss you. They'll do better this time. But narcissists don't heal. They recycle. They repeat the same cycle with new people, or with the same person who hasn't yet escaped. It's hard to leave a narcissist, not because you love them, but because you've been conditioned to believe that love should hurt. That being misunderstood is your fault. That if you were just better, they'd finally be happy. But the truth is, there is no version of you that will ever be enough for someone who is never enough for themselves. Healing from narcissistic abuse begins with unlearning. Unlearning the belief that love should feel like survival, that affection must be earned, that walking on eggshells is normal. It begins by listening to your inner voice again, the one that went quiet, the one that was ignored, the one that always knew something wasn't right. Narcissists feed on silence, so speak. They thrive in confusion, so write down what happened. They manipulate in private, so share your story. You are not too much. You were never the problem. You were simply handed a mirror that only reflected their emptiness. And now, you have the chance to build a new mirror, one that reflects truth, one that reflects peace, one that doesn't shatter every time someone else feels small beside you. True love doesn't compete. It doesn't condition. It doesn't control. It sees you and still stays. Manipulation. Manipulation is one of the most powerful tools in dark psychology. It doesn't rely on force. It doesn't even need truth. It works silently, beneath awareness, reshaping a person's decisions without them realizing they've lost control. It begins with charm, a smile that feels warm, words that sound genuine, Someone takes interest in you. They ask questions. They listen. They laugh when you laugh. You feel a strange connection, like they understand you without you needing to explain. But it's not understanding, it's scanning. They're mapping you, your fears, your wants, your weaknesses, what you respond to, what makes you feel good, what makes you feel small. The manipulator creates a version of themselves that you will accept. They mirror your values. They echo your opinions. They become what you want to see. This is the hook. Once you're attached, the mask begins to slip. Subtle criticisms replace compliments. Your achievements are downplayed. Your decisions are questioned. But gently, never enough to alarm you, just enough to plant doubt. Then comes the confusion. Sometimes they're warm again. Sometimes they're cold. Sometimes they praise you. Sometimes they go silent. This unpredictability isn't a flaw. It's a tactic. It creates a cycle of hope and anxiety. You start chasing the version of them that made you feel safe, the one they showed you at the beginning. But that version was never real. This cycle is called intermittent reinforcement. It's the same psychological principle that makes slot machines addictive. You never know when the next reward is coming, so you keep trying over and over, hoping for the moment they smile again, hoping for that warmth. And because it worked once, you believe it'll work again. You blame yourself for the distance. You try harder. You compromise more. You explain away the red flags. You become loyal to someone who is slowly dismantling your sense of self. Manipulators don't need to shout. They don't need to demand. They just need access to your mind, to your narrative. They change your story from the inside. You start to say things like, I know they care. They're just stressed. They didn't mean it that way. It's probably my fault. You defend them, even to yourself, even when their behavior hurts you, because the bond they created was never real. It was manufactured. But your attachment? That's real. And it's weaponized. One of the cruelest tricks of manipulation is making you feel like you're the manipulator. They push you to the edge, then step back. And when you finally react, they call you unstable. They say you're overthinking. You become the problem. You question your memory. You question your feelings. You lose trust in your own mind. This is gaslighting, another branch of manipulation. It makes you feel like you're losing grip, but you're not. You're just being pulled deeper into someone else's version of reality. Manipulation is not always done by villains. Sometimes it's done by people who smile, by people who claim to love you, by people who believe their intentions are pure. But manipulation is not about intent. It's about effect. And the effect is always the same: control. Some manipulators use guilt. They make you feel selfish for setting boundaries. They act wounded when you say no. They cry at just the right moment, not because they feel sad, but because they know you'll fold when you see them in pain. Others use shame. They remind you of your mistakes. They say things that sound like jokes, but leave you feeling small. They know exactly where to hit you because they took the time to learn. And then there are those who manipulate through silence. They disappear. They withdraw affection. They stop replying. They make you feel punished without a word. And when they return, you welcome them because silence hurts more than cruelty. And when they speak again, it feels like forgiveness, even if you never did anything wrong. Manipulators don't just want obedience, they want submission, not of your actions, but of your identity. They want to shape how you see yourself, so you no longer need them to control you. You'll control yourself for them. Eventually, the version of you that once had boundaries begins to disappear. You stop asking questions. You stop expressing needs. You learn to read their moods before you speak. You think you're being careful, but really, you're being trained. This is how manipulation turns people into shadows, into quieter versions of themselves, not through fear, but through love twisted into a leash. And the cruelest part? No one sees it from the outside. To the world, the manipulator looks kind, charming, generous, and you look distant, anxious, maybe even ungrateful, because the story they tell about you is different from the one you're living. And when you finally break, you might hear, "But they were always so good to you." And you'll wonder if maybe they were, because that's how deep the manipulation runs. Escaping manipulation is not about revenge, it's about clarity, about remembering who you were before you were rewritten, about stepping out of a script you never agreed to, about understanding that control wrapped in kindness is still control, and true love doesn't need to be earned through silence, fear, or self erasure. Obsessive rumination, prison of the mind. There are thoughts that don't end, not because they matter, but because they've found a crack in the mind. They slip through when the world is quiet. At night, when no one is around to distract or deny, a single sentence, a moment replayed, a question with no answer, and suddenly the brain becomes a loop, endless, recursive, consuming. This is obsessive rumination, a psychological trap where thoughts repeat, not by choice, but by force. The mind becomes stuck, frozen between past regrets and future fears. Time passes, but the thought remains, pressed against the inside of the skull like a whisper you can't unhear. It starts subtly. A memory resurfaces. Something you said, something you didn't say, a decision made, a look exchanged. It doesn't even need to be important, just unresolved. And once it's there, it won't leave. The brain begins to chew on it, over and over, as if repetition could rewrite reality. Sleep becomes difficult. The body is tired, but the mind refuses. It searches for closure that never arrives. Every possible variation is explored. What if I had done it differently? What did they mean by that? Was I wrong? Was I right? The answers don't matter. Only the spinning matters. Rumination isn't reflection. It's not insight. It's a malfunction, a hijacking of cognitive energy. Instead of solving a problem, the mind becomes the problem. Instead of clarity, there is friction. The more you try to let go, the tighter the thought clings. The ruminative mind feels like drowning in still water. Nothing moves, yet panic builds. The same sentence loops. Why did I do that? What if they never forgive me? What if it happens again? The brain tries to control the uncontrollable, to rewrite the past with present logic. But logic has no power here. Only obsession does. Some ruminations are rooted in guilt, a mistake, real or imagined. The mind punishes itself with replay, not once, not twice, but hundreds of times, as if pain could become penance. as if self-inflicted shame could undo history. Others are born of fear. The future spins out in worst-case scenarios. What if I fail? What if they leave? What if everything collapses? These thoughts feel responsible, as if worry could prevent disaster, as if anxiety was the price of safety. There are no breaks, no off switch. Even moments of peace are punctured. A word, a scent, a silence, and the thought is back, lurking, whispering, spinning. The day becomes a distraction. The night becomes a reckoning. People on the outside don't understand. They say, just stop thinking about it. But that's like telling a drowning person to breathe. The ruminative mind doesn't obey. It doesn't want attention. It wants control. And control is an illusion it can never catch. The body suffers too. Muscles stay tense. Breathing grows shallow. The nervous system remains in fight or flight, responding to imagined threats as if they were real. Sleep is broken. Appetite shifts. Focus fades. The whole system is dragged down by a single looping thought. Some people turn to rituals, rechecking, rewriting, repeating phrases, anything to stop the thought from growing. But these only feed the cycle. The thought becomes the center of existence. Everything else becomes noise. Rumination often pairs with perfectionism, the belief that there's a right answer, a perfect decision, a way to be flawless in every action. This belief is poison because perfection is unattainable, and the ruminative mind never forgives imperfection. It also feeds off shame, not just, I made a mistake, but I am the mistake. The thought becomes identity. I'm a failure. I'm broken. I ruin everything. And once that narrative sets in, every new thought serves it. Every memory is filtered through self-blame. Even when the thought is irrational, it feels real. Emotion makes it vivid. The brain believes what it feels, not what it knows. Logic can't overpower panic, and so the cycle continues. Sometimes the only relief is distraction, noise, screens, movement. But in stillness, the thought returns, like a ghost that only appears in silence. And eventually, even distraction stops working. The thought slips through everything. This is why rumination is often mistaken for personality. People say, I'm just overthinker. But it's not a trait. It's a symptom, a sign that something inside is unresolved, a trauma unprocessed, a fear unspoken, a boundary crossed. The darkest part of obsessive rumination is when it turns against survival. Thoughts of worthlessness, of despair, of escape. The loop becomes a noose, each repetition tightening around the will to live. And still, the mind spins, because that's all it knows how to do. Breaking the loop isn't easy. It requires intervention, therapy, cognitive restructuring, grounding in the present. The thought cannot be killed, but it can be released, starved of attention, seen, named, and left alone. Sometimes, writing helps, putting the thought outside the body, giving it form, so it can be studied, not obeyed. Other times, movement helps, running, walking, shaking the body out of paralysis, anything to shift energy from mind to muscle. Mindfulness isn't a cure, but it's a weapon, not to stop the thought, but to watch it, to say, this is a loop, this is not me. And in that witnessing, a small distance forms, a crack in the cycle. Sleep returns, slowly, not perfectly. Some nights, the thought returns, pounding like rain on glass. But other nights, there is peace, gaps between the loops, moments of quiet. These are victories, not solutions, but signs of healing. The goal is not to control the mind, it's to coexist with it, to recognize its tricks, to know when a thought is not a truth, but a trap, and to let it pass without building it a home. In the end, the ruminative mind doesn't need more answers. It needs permission to rest, to stop solving what can't be solved, to leave the past alone, to let the future come unplanned. And in that surrender, sleep becomes possible, not because the thought is gone, but because the self is no longer its prisoner. Folie à deux, shared madness. There is a madness that doesn't begin in one person. It starts in silence, in subtle agreements, in glances and unfinished sentences. Two people, alone, vulnerable, lost in their own thoughts, find each other. One begins to speak the unspoken, the other listens, and in that listening, reality begins to bend. This is folie à deux, a shared delusion, a psychological fusion where fantasy is mistaken for fact and two minds collapse into one distorted truth. It begins with one dominant figure, paranoid, obsessive, detached from the ordinary flow of logic. They don't trust others. They see patterns no one else sees. They know something isn't right. The world is dangerous. People lie. Threats are hidden behind smiles. Their fear is total, but it needs an audience. Then comes the second, more passive, more impressionable, lonely, dependent, searching for certainty in a confusing world. They don't question much. They want to believe someone has answers. When the dominant one shares their fears, their theories, their conviction, the passive one doesn't resist. They absorb it, and in absorbing it, they make it real. The delusion grows between them like mold in a sealed room. It feeds on isolation. They stop engaging with others. Friends are dismissed as naive. Family is labeled dangerous. Outsiders don't understand. Only the two of them see clearly. Every doubt is reframed as proof of betrayal. Every disagreement is evidence of a conspiracy. Sleep becomes infected, not with nightmares, but with vigilance. Their minds scan for threats, even in rest, whispers in the dark, sudden awakenings, checking locks, reviewing events over and over. The shared belief consumes every waking hour, and it doesn't let go at night. Their dreams become echoes of the same paranoia. This condition isn't limited to romantic couples. It occurs in siblings, parent-child pairs, close friends, even cult leaders and followers. Anywhere closeness meets instability, the conditions are ripe. It's not the content of the belief that matters. It can be anything from persecution to divine purpose. What matters is the intensity, the certainty, the emotional fusion. Over time, boundaries dissolve. They speak the same phrases, repeat the same ideas, finish each other's sentences, not out of affection, but obsession. They no longer see each other as separate beings, but as one unit against the world. Anyone who tries to intervene becomes the enemy. The delusion often escalates. It demands action. Paranoia turns into behavior, moving to escape imaginary threats, cutting ties with reality, sometimes even violence. The dominant partner pushes, the passive partner follows, and each step deeper reinforces the belief that they are right and everyone else is wrong. Breaking a folie à deux is almost impossible from the inside. The feedback loop is airtight. Dissent is betrayal. Fear is evidence. Logic is manipulation. The more you challenge them, the more convinced they become. It's not just a belief, it's identity, safety, purpose. The passive one often suffers most. When the bond finally breaks, through arrest, separation, or tragedy, they're left alone with the wreckage. They question everything. Who was I before this? Did I ever believe anything on my own? The dominant one may move on to another follower. The passive one is left to rebuild a mind that no longer knows what to trust. Even after separation, the delusion lingers. Sleep remains restless. The thoughts echo. What if they were right? What if the danger is still out there? The belief may fade, but the fear stays, because even false realities can feel safer than empty ones. And once you've shared madness with someone, normalcy feels cold. This disorder is rare, but its patterns appear in more common forms. Groupthink, mass hysteria, echo chambers. In these spaces, doubt is punished, certainty is contagious, and complexity is erased. The group offers comfort, belonging, identity, but it demands one thing in return: surrender. In extreme cases, folie à deux becomes lethal. Parents who kill their children, believing it's protection. Siblings who die in isolation, convinced of a shared enemy. Couples who commit crimes together under the belief that they are chosen, righteous, above the law. These aren't just stories, they're warnings of what happens when fear meets devotion without resistance. There's a reason this condition terrifies psychologists. It reveals how fragile the mind really is, how reality is not just a solo experience, but a shared construction. And if two people agree on a lie with enough intensity, it becomes their truth. Treatment requires separation, breaking the bond, removing the reinforcement. Only then can the passive partner begin to question, to grieve, to rebuild. But even then, recovery is slow. The brain must relearn how to think independently, how to tolerate uncertainty, how to exist without the other. The dominant partner often resists treatment. They don't see a problem. To them, the delusion is truth. Anyone who disagrees is blind or malicious. They may find another believer. The pattern repeats. What makes folie à deux so haunting is how intimate it is. It's not imposed. It's chosen. Two minds voluntarily collapsing into each other, not through force, but need. The need to be understood, to be seen, to be believed. And that need can be so strong, it overrides everything else, even reality. In the quiet hours of the night, when the world is still, this delusion tightens its grip. The mind seeks confirmation. The other person whispers reassurance. And in that exchange, doubt dies, truth dies. What remains is the illusion of safety, shared, sacred, unshakable. The damage comes later, when the spell breaks, when the world returns, when the other person is gone, and the silence is deafening. Sleep becomes a confrontation, with choices made, thoughts absorbed, things believed that can't be undone. The mind, once merged, must relearn how to be alone, and that loneliness feels unbearable, like being exiled from a world you helped invent. Folie à deux is not about weakness, it's about vulnerability, how easily the need to belong can become the need to dissolve, to disappear into another person, to lose the burden of thinking alone. But shared madness, no matter how comforting, always ends the same way, with separation, regret, and the slow rebuilding of truth. Sleep returns eventually, but it comes with new rules, a deeper caution, a fear of closeness, a reluctance to believe too much, feel too deeply, trust too quickly. The mind, once broken by fusion, becomes guarded. And while that guard protects, it also isolates. The cure for shared delusion is not just separation, it's reconnection with reality, with self, with a world that doesn't offer certainty, but does offer freedom. And in that freedom, sleep becomes something different, not an escape, but a return. Emotional numbing. There is a type of survival that doesn't scream. It doesn't cry, break down, or lash out. It simply shuts off. When pain becomes too much, when feelings become dangerous, the mind doesn't resist, it disconnects. This is emotional numbing, a quiet, invisible form of psychological armor, not worn with pride, but with necessity. At first, numbing is protective. The body senses threat, not always physical, often emotional. Rejection, shame, abandonment, failure. These wounds are not seen, but they are felt. And when they go too deep, the mind steps in to reduce the impact. It doesn't erase the pain, it just dulls it, turns down the volume, blurs the lines. Over time, this defense becomes default. Not only is pain blocked, so is joy. Excitement fades. Gratitude feels distant. Laughter sounds foreign. The full range of human experience becomes inaccessible. The world continues, but the self feels separate from it, disconnected, not quite present. People often confuse numbing with strength. You're so calm. You don't let things get to you. But it's not calm. It's absence. What looks like composure is actually withdrawal, a retreat into silence, because feeling is dangerous when it has led to chaos, when vulnerability has been punished, when emotion has become a liability. Sleep becomes complex in this state, not because of overwhelming thoughts, but because of their absence. The mind drifts through static, emptiness, a kind of weightless insomnia. You're tired, but you're not truly present enough to rest. The body lies still, but the spirit is hovering somewhere distant. The causes of emotional numbing vary: chronic trauma, emotional neglect, repeated invalidation, a parent who punished emotion, a partner who manipulated it, a culture that equated vulnerability with weakness. These environments teach one lesson: feeling leads to harm. So, the response is simple: stop feeling. This isn't a decision, it's an adaptation. The nervous system learns to suppress signals. The brain rewires emotional pathways. Neurochemicals shift. It becomes easier to ignore than engage. And like any habit, repetition makes it automatic. Over time, relationships suffer. Friends begin to notice distance. Partners feel unseen. Conversations become shallow, not because of lack of care, but because of lack of access. The emotions are there, buried, dormant, unreachable. And the person suffering from numbing often feels guilt. They want to care more, to feel more, but the door won't open. This disconnection isn't always total. Sometimes moments break through: a song, a memory, a sudden loss. In those flashes, emotion floods in too fast. It's overwhelming, so the system shuts back down. It's a cycle: brief presence, then retreat. Like someone watching life through a fogged window, never fully touching it. One of the cruelest tricks of numbing is how it affects self-worth. Without emotion, it's hard to gauge meaning. Achievements feel hollow. Love feels abstract. Gratitude feels forced. This creates a quiet despair. The person begins to ask, "What's wrong with me? Why don't I feel anything?" They may turn to stimulation, loud music, risky behavior, emotional chaos, anything to feel something. Or they may retreat into routine, perfectionism, control, anything to avoid the unknown terrain of real feeling. But neither approach solves the core issue. They just delay it. Sleep, once again, becomes the battleground because it requires surrender. It asks the mind to soften, to feel safe, to release control. But for the emotionally numb, control is the only thing keeping them afloat. Letting go means opening the door to everything they've been avoiding. So they resist, sometimes consciously, often unconsciously. The body stays tense. The mind stays alert. Night becomes another form of vigilance. Even dreams change. They become flat, disjointed, or absent. Or worse, emotion comes back only in sleep, through nightmares, sudden grief, inexplicable dread, and waken feels like pulling back into armor before the day begins. Reversing emotional numbing isn't about forcing feeling, it's about creating safety. The nervous system must believe it's allowed to feel without punishment. This takes time. It starts with awareness, noticing the absence, naming the patterns, saying, I'm not cold, I'm protecting something. Journaling can help. So can therapy. So can slow, consistent connection with people who don't demand access but offer presence. Healing doesn't come through intensity, it comes through consistency, through small signals to the body that it's okay to soften, that tears won't be punished, that laughter won't be taken away. Often, numbing hides grief, not just grief for events, but for lost self, the child who once felt freely, the version of you who wasn't afraid to care, to love, to risk, to be vulnerable. Reconnecting with that self means mourning their absence, and that mourning, when it comes, is raw. But it's also the first sign of return. Numbing also hides anger, years of repressed boundaries, swallowed words, silent betrayals. When those emotions return, they're often mislabeled as irrational, but they're not irrational. They're delayed. They've waited patiently, and now they demand attention. This can feel overwhelming, but it's progress. Feeling anything is a sign that the armor is cracking. Some people will resist this change. They've benefited from your numbness, your silence, your compliance. They may mock your feelings, dismiss your boundaries, try to pull you back into emotional stillness. Not because they're evil, but because your awakening threatens the dynamic they've come to rely on. But numbness is not peace, it is stasis. Peace involves movement, emotion, expression. Peace includes sadness, disappointment, joy, surprise. Peace includes the whole spectrum of being alive. Reclaiming emotion means accepting mess. Feelings won't be clean. They won't be convenient. They'll rise at inopportune times. They'll contradict each other, but they'll be real. And real is what heals. As the numbness fades, sleep begins to change. The mind doesn't race, it processes. The body doesn't brace, it releases. Dreams become strange, vivid, emotional, sometimes painful, but eventually meaningful. And waking doesn't feel like armor being strapped on. It feels like a continuation of something human. Emotional numbing is not weakness, it's evidence of strength, of endurance, of survival. But survival is not the same as living. And sleep, true sleep, is a sign that the body no longer fears its own vulnerability. The return to emotion is slow, but it is inevitable. Because beneath the armor, the self still breathes, still waits, still feels. Trauma bonding. Pain creates strange loyalties. In some situations, the very person who causes the suffering becomes the only source of comfort. This paradox is the core of trauma bonding, a psychological trap where abuse and affection are intertwined so tightly that escape feels like betrayal and staying feels like survival. Trauma bonding doesn't happen all at once. It forms gradually through a cycle of cruelty and kindness. The abuser inflicts pain, then offers comfort. Humiliation is followed by affection. Fear is soothed with moments of tenderness. Over time, this cycle conditions the victim to associate harm with love. They stop resisting because they're no longer sure what's safe. This bond is not logical. It bypasses the conscious mind and wires itself into the nervous system. Every moment of fear is followed by relief, and that contrast creates intensity. The brain, flooded with stress hormones, begins to crave the chemical payoff of reconciliation. It's not affection being sought, it's dopamine, cortisol, adrenaline, then oxytocin. This chemical roller coaster mimics love, but it's not love, it's addiction. The most insidious part is how subtle it can be. Trauma bonding doesn't always look like bruises or shouting. It can be emotional manipulation, chronic neglect, inconsistent validation. It can wear the mask of romance, loyalty, even protection. One moment you're being degraded, the next you're being held. The contradiction itself becomes the hook. The inconsistency keeps the brain guessing, and uncertainty builds attachment faster than predictability ever could. Sleep becomes difficult in these dynamics because the body remains on high alert. Even during calm periods, the nervous system anticipates the next wave of pain. Safety feels suspicious. Peace feels temporary. The mind replays interactions, trying to decode motives, predict behavior, make sense of emotional whiplash. But there is no logic to intermittent reinforcement. That's what makes it powerful. Victims of trauma bonding often defend their abuser. They minimize the harm, highlight the good moments, rationalize the behavior. They're not always like this. They had a hard childhood. I provoke them sometimes. These justifications aren't weakness, they're survival mechanisms. Admitting the full truth would shatter the bond, and with it, the illusion of safety. Isolation intensifies the effect. Abusers often limit contact with friends and family, not through direct force, but through subtle discouragement. They don't understand us. They just want to break us up. The victim begins to believe that no one else can see what they see, the tender side, the vulnerable side. They feel chosen, needed, special, and in this illusion, they stay. Over time, identity erodes. The victim no longer knows where they end, and the abuser begins. They anticipate needs, silence their own pain, take responsibility for the other's emotions. They become experts at self blame. When things go wrong, they apologize. When things go right, they wait for the next collapse. There is no rest, only anticipation. At night, the mind replays every moment. Was that glance cold? Did that silence mean anger? Is the apology real this time? The uncertainty loops endlessly. The body remains tense. Sleep doesn't come easily. When it does, it's light and broken. Dreams bleed with confusion, fear, longing. Waking feels like falling back into the same script. Breaking a trauma bond feels like withdrawal. The body shakes, the heart races, the emptiness swells. It's not just losing a person, it's losing the only coping system that's been keeping the pain in check. The brain, deprived of the familiar cycle, panics, and many return, not because they want to, but because the silence feels unbearable. Even after escape, the bond lingers. Songs, smells, phrases can trigger waves of emotion. The trauma isn't just in memory, it's in the body. Relationships afterward are hard. Trust feels dangerous. Intimacy feels suspect. The old pattern threatens to repeat because familiarity often feels like safety, even when it's destructive. This is the trick of trauma bonding. It makes suffering feel like home, and when home is pain, the body forgets what peace feels like. Stillness becomes suspicious. Kindness feels manipulative. Distance feels like abandonment. So the mind clings to the abuser, to the pattern, to the belief that this is the best it will ever get. The bond is not a reflection of weakness. It's a response to psychological conditioning, Stockholm syndrome, behavioral reinforcement, complex trauma. These are not excuses, they're explanations. And understanding the mechanism is the first step toward dismantling it. Breaking free requires more than willpower. It requires reprogramming the nervous system, building new patterns, creating safety without chaos. It starts with acknowledging the harm, not just the behavior, but the impact, naming the manipulation, refusing to romanticize inconsistency, seeing love as steady, not euphoric. Therapy helps, connection helps, education helps. But the most important step is reclaiming narrative, saying, this was abuse, this was not love, this was not my fault. That sentence, though simple, fractures the illusion. And from that fracture, something new can grow. Sleep, once contaminated by anxiety and anticipation, slowly becomes a space for recovery. The nightmares may continue for a while. The body may still jolt awake, waiting for conflict. But with time and safety and truth, the system calms. The dreams soften. Rest returns. Trauma bonding is not just a relationship pattern. It's a psychological prison built from pain and hope twisted together. And escaping it is not betrayal, it's survival. It's choosing self respect over adrenaline. It's redefining love as something that doesn't hurt. The bond will resist. It will whisper in moments of loneliness. It will beg for nostalgia. It will disguise itself as forgiveness. But behind every memory is a truth. If it hurt and kept hurting and made you smaller, it wasn't love, it was control. And control dressed as care is still control. The path to healing is long, but it exists. It is paved not with euphoria, but with quiet decisions. Saying no, saying enough, saying goodbye, not just to a person, but to the pattern. And when sleep finally arrives, not as surrender, but as sanctuary, that's when the bond is truly broken. Not with a scream, but with silence, with rest, with peace earned not through suffering, but through self return.